Monica Goyal is a lawyer with the Alluvian law firm. And Monica, welcome to Sun News Network.
Thank you.
Okay, the Bedford case. Let's start with that. The Bedford case is an interesting one in that it allows prostitutes effectively to solicit. This is something that Parliament hasn't necessarily ruled one way or the other on it, but we're getting the courts weighing in saying, yeah, because of security of person and so on and so forth, this activity should go on. Give me the legal background, if you will, for the overview for this.
Well, the Bedford case is interesting. It's actually, there's a long history actually to this case. So there was a previous, so the Bedford case is what we call like a reference. So there was what they called a prostitution reference in 1990. And at that time it was brought by several ministers of Attorney General, provincial ministers of Attorney General. So this is, maybe some people call it like the part two of that. And in this particular case, what the Supreme Court was really, really based their decision on was the security of these women. So it wasn't so much that the act, like what the sex worker does, is actually illegal in Canada. What we've done in the criminal code is actually criminalize activities around the acts that sex workers do. So one is having a body house, operating it and having a body house. Two, soliciting for the purposes of prostitution.
But to be clear, prostitution still is an illegal activity?
It isn't, actually. The act itself is not. It's these activities around it that were criminalized, or that's criminalized in our criminal code.
Okay.
And so that was what was at issue, was this, like these particular criminal, like making these particular provisions criminal, was that then making these women more susceptible to violence?
Yeah, but these are women that know that they're in a quote-unquote risky business. They're not dealing with necessarily the stalwarts of society. They deal with all elements of society, and there's risk associated to that. I mean, if they were stunt car drivers, I mean, that's part of the job, isn't it?
And so the question is, like, should this really be criminalized?
Right.
Or should this be regulated? So in other countries, this is an activity that's actually regulated. And is that going to make these women, safer? The Constitution, so these provisions that were in the criminal code, they were found to be unconstitutional, according to the Supreme Court of Canada. Unanimous decision, which is very, kind of telling. Now, what they haven't done is they haven't said what the law should be. They've basically said, we think these are unconstitutional. Parliament, you go back and you figure out what is the right balance for our society. So they haven't trumped Parliament. Parliament still can actually, they can decide what that right balance should be. And if they want to, they can make some changes, and maybe they decide something similar to what we have right now.
So prostitution isn't illegal. Solicitation now, according to this court case, is not illegal, and body houses are not illegal, those kinds of things. What is the avenue that's left to Parliament? I mean, have all the avenues been shut by the courts?
Well, I wouldn't say so. I mean, potentially what they could do is they could go back and they could rewrite these provisions. If that's what, and I think part of this is to have a discussion with society. Does this really reflect our current values? For some people, maybe they're more interested in protecting the rights of these sex workers. I mean, this is the oldest profession. This has been around for a very long time. Are we going to actually, by criminalizing even these particular provisions, and potentially making these women criminals?
By calling them sex workers, it almost legitimizes the whole process, doesn't it? It's still prostitution. Okay, Monica, we have to take a quick break, commercial break. We'll be back in 2 minutes for more discussion on this topic. Don't go away. Welcome back. Monica Goyal of the Alluvian law firm joins us again. And Monica, when you look at these rulings that are coming down from the Supreme Court of Canada, particularly when it comes to the Charter, and we've seen examples of this in the past. I'm thinking of Insight, the drug injection systems in process in Vancouver, those kinds of things. Is the Supreme Court of Canada interpreting the Charter, and are they doing it correctly, or are they wrong in their approach?
It's hard to say, they're the highest level of the court in Canada, and it would be hard-pressed to say that they're doing anything wrong. I mean, their role is to interpret the charter and the laws and make decisions based on that. And in doing so, sometimes they create new law. So I wouldn't say that they're doing anything wrong. I mean, the question about, are they trumping Parliament in doing that? The charter was enacted by Parliament. The laws are enacted by Parliament. And at the end of the day, Parliament still has the last say.
Okay. But if I go to a trial judge in a normal trial, it's either right or wrong. Either I went through the red light or I didn't go through the red light kind of a thing. Are they interpreting what society wants, and isn't that the role of Parliament? And that goes back to what we were discussing before the break. These social norms, per se, that the court is putting in place as opposed to Parliament.
So the charter, if you think about the charter, part of its role is to protect minority rights, like people whose rights might be trampled by somebody else. And in this particular case, when you think about these women, what power do they have in order to lobby Parliament? I mean, this is a way to protect their rights in a way, and isn't that what judges should be doing too, is protecting people whose rights have been...
Yeah, given that we don't have prostitution is illegal anymore. I see your point there. Okay, now what are the implications? I mean, you're in a kind of legal limbo as much as anything, because on one hand you got your cop on the street or something, you got to enforce the laws. On the other hand, the Supreme Court is saying, hey, listen, let's throw it back to the charter, and the cop is going, what do I do?
Right, and that's a really interesting point, and I looked at some statistics for the city of Toronto, and in 2002, for example, there were approximately 1,400 arrests around these particular provisions, like solicitation, body house, and stuff like that. In 2012, that was down 90%, so it was around 200. Whoa. Yes, and that's including, probably cases that we do want to kind of protect, like children and stuff like that. So it does speak to this ambiguity around the law, as you've pointed out.
Okay, so that ties the policeman's hands,
right.
Or the perception that he's not necessarily having his hands tied. There's a perception out there.
And because of that ambiguity, they're reluctant to actually, prosecute on those particular charges because it could be appealed. I mean, in 2012, we had the Court of Appeal decision. So, there was already this coming through the system in Ontario, right?
Yeah, okay, so historically, if you went back, so 2012, I mean, that's still, you said our first ruling, that benchmark ruling, what was the term you used back in 1990?
The prostitution reference.
Right, exactly. Okay, so then 2012, in 20 years or 15 years or whatever since that initiative came, there were still 1,400 arrests going on. And now all of a sudden you throw it into the air and there's down to 100, or a couple of hundred arrests out there. I mean, how quickly can this get resolved, or is prostitution going to grow as a result?
I can't speak to the latter. And right now they have 1 year. So the Supreme Court of Canada decision gives Parliament 1 year to make whatever changes they want to make to the criminal code. So they basically suspended their ruling for 1 year. So it's actually not constitutional for this year. It's suspended, and then they have a chance to kind of remedy it, taking into consideration their decision.
Okay, can they go, we've talked in the past here about what they call the Norwegian model, changing the rules not to affect the prostitute or the prostitution solicitation or the body houses, but to focus instead on the Johns and have the rules based on what the Johns are doing. Right. Will we go that way, do you think?
And some of the rules, actually, that was kind of one of the approaches that we were taking. So if you look at the particular criminal code provisions that were being challenged in this case, one of them was around, living on the avails of prostitution.
Right, pimps.
Exactly. So we had already made that criminal, and that was one of the provisions that the Supreme Court of Canada said is unconstitutional.
So that's probably one of the 100 or 200 arrests that we saw this year focused on the pimps. So we just have to tighten up that side of things. If the courts are blocking out of the other side. Isn't that the case?
I don't know. I don't know.
We'll have to see how it plays
Yeah,
out. We've got a
exactly.
year's time, Monica.
Okay.
Great to have you here.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah.